Okay, thank you all very much for being here to discuss an issue of enormous consequence for the American people. The Trump budget introduced today constitutes a massive transfer of wealth from working families, the elderly, the children, the sick, and the poor to the top 1%. It follows in the footsteps of the Trump-Ryan health care bill, which gives huge tax breaks to the wealthiest few while throwing 24 million Americans off of their health insurance and dramatically raising premiums for older workers. This is a budget which says that if you are the richest family in America, the Walton family, you can get up to a $53 billion tax break through the repeal of the estate tax. $53 billion tax break. But at the same time, it says that if you are a lower income senior citizen, you will not be able to get the one nutritious meal a day you now receive through the Meals on Wheels program or the help you desperately need if you are disabled. This is a budget that says that if you are the second wealthiest family in America, the Koch brothers family, a family that has contributed many hundreds of millions of dollars into the Republican Party, you may get up to a $34 billion tax break. But at the same time, if you are a working class student trying to figure out how you could possibly afford college, your dream of a college education will evaporate because of major cuts to student financial assistance programs. This is a budget which says that if you are a member of the Trump family, you may receive a tax break of up to $4 billion. But if you are a child of a working class family, you could well lose the health insurance you currently have through the Children's Health Insurance Program and massive cuts to Medicaid. At a time when we remain the only major country on earth not to guarantee health care to all, this budget makes a bad situation worse in terms of health care. In other words, this is a budget that provides massive tax breaks for billionaires and corporate CEOs and massive cuts to programs that tens of millions of struggling Americans depend upon. When Donald Trump campaigned for president, he told the American people that he would be a different type of Republican, that he would take on the political and economics establishment, that he would stand up for working people, that he understood the pain that families all across this country were experiencing. Well, sadly, this budget exposes all of that verbiage for what it really was, just cheap and dishonest campaign rhetoric that was meant to get votes, nothing more than that. At a time when the very rich are already getting much richer, while the middle class continues to shrink, this is a budget for the billionaire class, for Wall Street, for corporate CEOs, and for the wealthiest people in this country. This is a budget which will make it harder for our children to get a decent education, harder for working families to get the health care they desperately need, harder for families to put food on the table, harder to protect our environment, and harder for the elderly to live out their retirement years in dignity. This is a budget that is immoral and that will cause an enormous amount of pain for the most vulnerable people in our nation. This is a budget that will be rejected by the American people and must not see the light of day here in Congress. John Yarmuth is the ranking member of the Budget Committee in the House. John, thanks a lot for being with us.
Senator. The budget released today by the Trump administration is shockingly extreme and the antithesis of what the American people have said they want from their government. The president's budget leaves no question about what his administration values: greater gains for millionaires, corporations, and special interests at the expense of American families, economic progress, and our national security. It is a total embrace of the Robin Hood in reverse mentality we saw with the Republican health care repeal bill and the administration's tax proposal, both of which have been overwhelmingly rejected by the American people. This budget actually targets assistance for people with disabilities, cutting Social Security disability insurance, despite the president's pledge to not touch Social Security at all. Yes, the president's budget is a betrayal, a line-by-line tally of broken promises he made to the American people. But above all, it's a trail of broken dreams and the loss of hope and opportunity for millions of families. This budget starts by taking away health care, then food, then housing, then education, then job opportunities. For nearly every American family struggling to get ahead, this budget makes it that much harder, if not impossible. The level of cuts to investments that the American people need is astonishing, and the consequences of these cuts, as Bernie said, are frankly immoral. The Trump administration makes all these harmful cuts for one simple, disgraceful reason: to try to hide the fact that their huge tax breaks for millionaires, corporations, and special interests will explode the debt. And they even do this in a dishonest way. This budget relies on absurd economic projections and pretend revenues that no credible economist would validate. It provides no real information on their tax reform other than to claim that it's revenue neutral. I guess this is the president's "believe me" part of his budget. If Donald Trump used these budgeting techniques in his business, not even the Russians would invest in his projects. With all due respect to the president, we aren't going to take his word for it, particularly when no one else will. We have been down this road before, more than once, and all the evidence proves is that tax cuts for corporations and the wealthiest Americans do not pay for themselves. Instead, they explode our deficit, rob our country of needed investments, and make those at the top even richer. This is not what the American people want or deserve. The American people do not want us pitting teachers against soldiers or choosing to update tanks over textbooks. They want us to ensure that our military and our American families both have the tools needed for success. In fact, that is our responsibility, and it's also our responsibility to invest in their future and help grow our economy. Education, health care, job training, innovation, and infrastructure, investments that help individuals with nowhere left to turn, and a tax code that helps families get ahead. These are American priorities, and they should be the priorities of the Congress. And now, I have the pleasure of introducing, introducing, and I don't interview.
I have a trick
Minority
question.
leader.
After hearing each of them speak, which one is from Brooklyn and which one is from Kentucky? Anyway, it's great to be here. I want to thank our leaders of the Budget Committee, Senator Sanders and Congressman Yarmouth, and thank to Leader Pelosi, who will be joining us shortly. Now, in case you haven't had time to review the president's budget, let me sum it up for you. The Trump budget takes a sledgehammer to the middle class and to working class Americans, lavishes tax breaks on the wealthy, and imagines all of the deficit problems away with fantasy math. This budget exists somewhere over the rainbow, where the dreams of Mick Mulvaney, Paul Ryan, and the Koch brothers really do come true. But of course, these dreams are a nightmare for the average working American. The Trump budget cuts transportation funding, education funding, programs that help students repay their student debt, one of the greatest burdens on middle-class kids and something that's slowing the country's housing recovery. The Trump budget, which seeks more than $1 trillion in cuts to Medicaid and health care, would decimate health care options for rural Americans, children, seniors, and pull the rug on many of our rural hospitals throughout the country. Now, earlier, our colleague, Senator Cornyn of Texas, stated that this budget is, quote, a proposal of the president's priorities. Well, if that's true, it's clear the president has prioritized breaking his promises to the working people of America. For example, on the campaign trail, he promised over and over again he wouldn't cut Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. With this budget, he cuts 2 out of 3. He cuts Social Security disability benefits and cuts Medicaid by $1 trillion. The great irony of the Trump agenda is it hurts many of the people who supported him in the campaign. There is no clearer example of this irony than his budget. When you add it all up, the Trump budget is comic book villain bad, and just like comic books, it relies on fantasy to make all the numbers work. It's the kind of budget you might expect from someone who is rooting for a government shutdown. I'm optimistic it'll be roundly rejected by both parties here in the Congress. The way that we can reach a funding agreement in September is to do what we did last month, work together on a bipartisan basis, reject this extreme budget, tell President Trump and Mick Mulvaney to stay out of the negotiations, and come up with a plan that will help the American people and create jobs here at home. Leader Pelosi.
Thank you very much, Leader Schumer. It's an honor to be here with you and the distinguished ranking member of the Senate Budget Committee, as well as the distinguished ranking member of the House Budget Committee. I associate myself with their remarks, which I heard by phone on the way over. Here we are. President Trump's budget is a stark showcase of President Trump's broken promises to America's hardworking families. Jobs. As his own words, the president promised he would be the greatest job producer that God ever created. Instead, his budget steals hundreds of billions of dollars from critical job-creating investments in infrastructure, education, and clean energy. Healthcare. The president promised that he would, quote, free the earth from the miseries of disease. Instead, in addition to the devastation of Trump care, he wants to chop more than $7 billion from the National Institutes of Health, 1/5 of its budget. National Institute, the biblical power to cure, where you have scientific opportunity, you should put resources. Cuts, 1/5 of the budget. Social Security and Medicare has been mentioned by the leader and others. The president promised he would not cut Medicare, Medicaid, or Social Security. Instead, and this bears repeating, the budget slashes Social Security disability insurance benefits. And what's strange about it is when asked about it, Director Mulvaney said, we didn't cut Social Security. No, they cut Social Security disability insurance. That's cutting Social Security. Steals another $610 billion from Medicaid on top of the already staggering $840 billion Medicaid cut in Trump care. So we're talking about 1.4, almost $1.5 trillion. Thank you. $1 trillion in cuts in Medicare in Medicaid. The president promised, in terms of clean air and clean water, to make sure, he said, we have clean air and clean water. Instead, he is ransacking the EPA and slashing funding for cleaning up hazardous substances and for enforcing clean air and clean water laws. This is awful. The president's budget is short-sighted, based on false assumptions, goofy assumptions, and a cruel plan that perfectly reflects what Republicans in Congress have been trying to inflict on America for years. It's important to note this because some members are saying, oh, it's dead on arrival. Well, in the House, this budget is a step down the same road, and Mr. Yarmouth can attest to this, the same road to ruin advanced by years of House Republican budgets under Speaker Ryan and Chairman Price. Budgets which ransacked our investments in jobs, education, and for hardworking families. Budgets which sought to hand massive new tax breaks to the rich by stealing from food stamps and slashing Medicaid. All of this to give a tax break to the wealthiest people in our country. The budget, a national budget, should be a statement of our national values. What's important to us as a country should be reflected in how we allocate our resources. This budget fails to recognize that education is the greatest investment we can make in people reaching their aspirations and keeping America number one. And he also fails to recognize that nothing brings more to the Treasury than the education of the American people, early childhood, K through 12, higher education, lifetime learning. Nothing brings more money to the Treasury to reduce the deficit. So it's a false economy. It's one of the dumbest budget moves, with stiff competition, mind you, but one of the dumbest budget moves they can make. President Trump's budget shows that he does not value the future of our seniors, children, and our working families, and it should be rejected. Thank you, Mr. Leader.
I gotta go. Any questions? Yeah.
Thank you.
Can we talk for a moment about, you and I spoke yesterday about this, you said that you didn't think any sane Republican, your words, would vote for this. Do you feel, though, that because this budget is so extreme now that you all have seen this, that there's any chance that Republicans will do this because they talk about, well, this is going to squeeze us on appropriations, it's going to make it hard to pass the appropriations bills, and the rhetoric we're hearing from them is that it's, this is dead on arrival, too. I mean, that must give you guys some buoyancy.
Look, I mean, if I'm a Republican member of the House, do you really think I am looking forward to going home to whatever state I came from and say, yeah, I just voted for incredibly large tax breaks for billionaires. Oh, by the way, we're going to cut Head Start and child care and after-school programs and health care and education. I certainly, I don't know too many sane Republicans who want to go home to that dynamic. John, did you want to add something to that?
Well, a perfect example, he's slashing SNAP proposes slashing SNAP by $193 billion. We have 800,000 families in Kentucky who utilize food stamps, and a great number of these people are kids. And I can't imagine anything more cold-hearted, and I can't imagine anything that, Senator McConnell, Senator Paul, or my other 5 Republican colleagues would want to do and go home and say, we're going to cut all these people off of SNAP.
That's what I'm getting at, that when it comes to the appropriations time, that it's going to be tough to pass these, and your side will probably prevail.
Well, let me just say this, with all the respect in the world for the fact that some Republicans are saying this is dead on arrival. This is like they voted for the Ryan budget. The Ryan budget contains many of these same things. In fact, the Ryan budget also voucherizes Medicare. Medicare is a guarantee. The Ryan budget says it's no longer a guarantee, we're going to give you a voucher. It subscribes to their philosophy that Medicare should wither on the vine. So when we're talking about Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, this is a killer for the American people, literally a killer. And as long as the public is aware of what is in these budgets, and that's the important point, they have to know there is a price to pay in terms of public opinion if they would vote for this. But they all did already vote for the Ryan budget, so they've gone down this path before because they're deconstructionists. They don't believe in governance and they don't believe in science, so they don't feel compelled to do any of these things.
Is there anything in here that you see that you can work with the White House on?
Well, I think what is a good start, but totally inadequate in terms of its funding, is movement toward paid family and medical leave. The United States of America remains today the only major country on earth that does not guarantee paid family and medical leave. The funding for this proposal is minuscule compared to what the needs are. But I'm glad that the Trump administration recognizes the need for us to join not only major countries around the world, but many very poor countries as well. Maybe one last question. Yes, sir.
Previously, Republicans like to bring up the Obama budget to have a vote on the Senate floor just to show there wasn't support for it. If this budget is as bad as you say it is, and the Republican reaction is as bad as you say it is, do you plan on trying to do that tactic this time?
That may well be a possibility. Okay. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Summer